The sound of a slap echoed through the dusty saloon as Theresa Kelly clutched her stinging cheek, tears welling in her eyes while the patrons looked on with indifference. It was 1878 in the frontier town of Redemption Creek, Wyoming Territory, and for a woman alone, justice was as scarce as rain in August. "That'll teach you to speak out of turn," growled Victor Blackstone, the saloon owner who'd hired her as a singer just 3 weeks prior. His meaty hand gripped her arm with bruising force. "Now get back up there and finish your set, or you'll be out on the street with nothing." Theresa trembled, her auburn hair falling across her face as she struggled to steady herself. At 23, she'd come west after losing her parents to influenza in Chicago, hoping to make a new start with nothing but her voice and determination. But Redemption Creek had proven to be anything but redemptive. "I can't sing when you're shorting my pay," she whispered, instantly regretting her continued defiance when she saw the dangerous gleam in Blackstone's eyes. "Then maybe you need another reminder of your place," he snarled, raising his hand again. The saloon door swung open, spilling harsh sunlight into the dim room. A tall silhouette stood framed in the doorway, and the usual chatter fell to a hush. "I believe the lady said no," came a quiet voice, steady as bedrock. Lucian Vance stepped into the saloon, spurs jingling softly with each deliberate step. At 32, his face was weathered from years under the sun, but his eyes remained clear and sharp beneath the brim of his well-worn Stetson. He wasn't a man who sought trouble, but neither did he walk away when it found him. "This ain't your concern, Vance," Blackstone spat. "This is between me and my employee." Lucian's gaze never left Blackstone, but he addressed Theresa. "Madam, are you being paid what you were promised?" Theresa hesitated, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. "No, sir, I'm not." "Then it appears there's a dispute that needs settling." Lucian shifted slightly, his long duster coat revealing the holstered Colt at his hip. "I suggest you release the lady and pay her what she's owed," Blackstone sneered. "Who do you think you are riding in here giving orders? You're just a cowhand passing through." "I'm a man who doesn't abide seeing a woman mistreated," Lucian replied, his voice remaining level. "And I'm trail boss for the Silverton outfit now. We've just driven 2,000 head to the railhead, and my men are coming to town with full pockets. They can drink here or elsewhere." The saloon owner's face darkened as he calculated the potential loss of business. With a grunt, he released Theresa's arm and reached into his pocket, flinging several coins onto the floor at her feet. "Pick it up," he sneered, "and don't come back tomorrow. You're finished here." Theresa stared at the scattered money, humiliation burning hotter than the slap had. The saloon had fallen silent, spectators waiting to see what she would do. Pride told her to leave the coins where they lay, but practicality reminded her that pride wouldn't buy food or shelter. Before she could move, Lucian stepped forward, his boots stopping just short of the coins. "A gentleman pays a lady her due with respect," he said, his eyes never leaving Blackstone. "Pick it up yourself and hand it to her proper, or we'll take our discussion outside." The threat hung in the air, palpable as gunsmoke. Blackstone was a bully, but he wasn't a gunfighter. After a tense moment, he bent down with a curse, gathered the coins, and slapped them onto Theresa's palm. "Now apologize to the lady," Lucian pressed. "The hell I will—" Lucian's hand moved to his holster, not drawing, just resting there. "I insist." Blackstone's face twisted with fury, but he muttered, "Sorry for the misunderstanding, Miss Kelly." Theresa clutched the coins, unable to believe what she was witnessing. No one had stood up for her since her father died. She'd been alone, vulnerable, making her way through a world that showed little mercy to a woman without protection. "Thank you," she managed to whisper, though whether to Blackstone or Lucian, even she wasn't sure. Lucian nodded toward the door. "If you're finished here, madam, perhaps I could escort you home." Theresa glanced at the hostile face of her now former employer, then back to the cowboy whose intervention had saved her from further abuse, but also cost her job. "Yes, I believe I am finished," she said, gathering what dignity she could. Outside, the late afternoon sun bathed the dirt street in golden light. Theresa breathed deeply, trying to calm her racing heart. "I appreciate your help, Mr. Vance, but you shouldn't have troubled yourself," she said, unable to meet his eyes. "Now I'm without employment, and rooms at the boarding house aren't cheap." Lucian removed his hat, revealing sandy hair that curled slightly at the ends. "No man has the right to lay hands on a woman in anger, Miss Kelly. I couldn't stand by and watch." "Many do," she replied bitterly. "Watch, that is." He nodded solemnly. "Too many. I'm sorry for that." He glanced down the street. "May I walk you to your lodgings? I'd like to make sure you arrive safely." Theresa hesitated. Kindness from strange men usually came with expectations, but something in Lucian's steady gaze convinced her his offer was genuine. "That would be kind, thank you," she said, falling into step beside him. They walked in silence for a moment before Lucian spoke again. "If you're looking for work, Miss Kelly, I believe Mrs. Martinez at the cafe is short-handed. She mentioned needing help just yesterday." "A cafe?" Theresa considered this. "I've waited tables before, but I came west to sing." "And you sing beautifully," Lucian said, surprising her. "I heard you last week when I came into town for supplies. Your voice, it reminds me of home." "You've been in town that long?" she asked. "Just passing through between cattle drives. The Silverton Ranch keeps me busy most of the year." He adjusted his hat against the setting sun. "Where did you learn to sing like that?" "My mother," Theresa replied, a small smile touching her lips at the memory. "She sang in church every Sunday back in Chicago, taught me everything I know." "She taught you well." They reached the modest boarding house where Theresa rented a small room. She paused at the steps, suddenly reluctant to end this brief moment of kindness. "Mr. Vance, I truly do appreciate your intervention today." He nodded. "Lucian, please." And it was the right thing to do, nothing more. Still, not everyone would have done the right thing. She hesitated, then offered her hand. "I'm Theresa Kelly." His large, calloused hand enveloped hers gently. "Miss Kelly, if you'll permit me, I'd like to check on you tomorrow. Perhaps I could accompany you to speak with Mrs. Martinez about that position." The offer surprised her. "You needn't feel responsible for me, Mr. Vance Lucian. I've been taking care of myself for some time now." "I don't doubt your capability, Miss Kelly, but even the strongest souls can use a friend now and then." Friend. The word warmed her more than she expected. "Very well. I'll be here around 9 if that suits." He smiled then, transforming his serious face. 9 it is. As Theresa watched him walk away, she felt a curious mixture of hope and trepidation. The West had taught her harsh lessons about trusting too easily, but something about Lucian Vance made her want to believe that not every hand extended would eventually strike. The next morning, Theresa woke to the sounds of the town coming to life. She dressed carefully in her best day dress, a modest blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. Her worldly possessions fit into one trunk, mostly clothes, a few cherished books, and her mother's silver hairbrush. She'd sold almost everything else to purchase the train ticket west. A knock at precisely 9 o'clock startled her from her thoughts. When she opened the door, Lucian stood there, hat in hand, freshly shaven and wearing a clean shirt beneath his vest. "Good morning, Miss Kelly," he said with a slight bow. "I trust you rested well?" "As well as could be expected," she answered honestly, closing her door behind her. "I spent much of the night wondering what I'll do if Mrs. Martinez has no position for me." They walked together down the main street, drawing curious glances from townsfolk. Lucian seemed oblivious to the attention, but Theresa felt the weight of every stare. "People are watching us," she murmured. "Small towns run on gossip," he replied with a slight shrug. "Let them watch." The cafe was a modest establishment, but clean and welcoming. The scent of fresh bread and coffee filled the air as they entered. A plump woman with graying black hair tied back in a severe bun looked up from behind the counter. "Lucian Vance, as I live and breathe," she exclaimed with a warm smile. "What brings you to my humble cafe 2 days in a row?" "Good morning, Mrs. Martinez. I've brought someone I'd like you to meet." He gestured to Theresa. "This is Miss Theresa Kelly. I believe she might be interested in that position you mentioned. Mrs. Martinez's keen eyes took in Teresa's appearance, lingering on the fading bruise at her cheekbone that Theresa had tried to conceal with powder. The singer from the Silver Dollar, Mrs. Martinez nodded. I've heard about you, child, both your voice and what happened yesterday. Theresa flushed. News travels fast. Faster than a rattlesnake strike in this town, the older woman agreed. But I judge people by their own merits, not Blackstone's temper. Can you serve tables and help in the kitchen? Yes, madam. I worked in a restaurant in Chicago before coming west. And are you planning to stay in Redemption Creek, or is this just until something better comes along? Theresa hesitated. I honestly don't know, madam. I came west seeking opportunity, but you found Blackstone instead, Mrs. Martinez finished for her. She wiped her hands on her apron. Well, I need help now, and you need work now. We can figure out the rest as we go. 6 days a week, Sundays off, meals included, and $2 a week. Fair? It was less than she'd made singing, but the meals would help and she'd be treated with respect. Yes, madam, that's fair. When would you like me to start? How about right now? Mrs. Martinez tossed her an apron. The morning rush will be starting soon. Lucian smiled at the exchange. I knew you two would get along, he said. Miss Kelly has a good heart, Mrs. Martinez, and the voice of an angel, though I suppose that won't help much with the breakfast crowd. Mrs. Martinez chuckled. You never know. A bit of song might brighten the place up. She turned to Theresa. You can sing while you work if you'd like, child. This isn't the Silver Dollar, but folks appreciate beauty wherever they find it. Theresa tied the apron around her waist, feeling a tentative hope bloom in her chest. Thank you both. Truly. Lucian placed his hat back on his head. I'll leave you to get acquainted. I've got business to attend to, but perhaps I could return for supper? I'm sure Miss Kelly will still be here, Mrs. Martinez replied, before Theresa could answer. First day is always the longest. After Lucian left, Mrs. Martinez showed Theresa around the small kitchen and dining area, explaining her duties and introducing her to the cook, an elderly man named Samuel, who barely acknowledged her presence with a grunt. Don't mind him, Mrs. Martinez whispered. He's a genius with food, but hasn't spoken more than 10 words at once since his wife passed. The morning passed in a blur as Theresa learned the rhythm of the cafe. By midday, her feet ached and she'd spilled coffee twice. But Mrs. Martinez was patient, and the customers largely kind. It wasn't singing on stage, but neither was it enduring Blackstone's wandering hands and cruel remarks. As promised, Lucian returned for the evening meal. The cafe was quiet by then, with only a few patrons lingering over coffee. He took a seat at a corner table, and Theresa approached with a nervous smile. What can I get for you this evening, Mr. Vance? She asked, acutely aware of Mrs. Martinez watching from behind the counter. Whatever Samuel recommends, he replied. And please, it's still Lucian. She nodded. Lucian, then. Samuel's stew is particularly good tonight. Then stew it shall be. He studied her face. How was your first day? Busy, but good. Mrs. Martinez is fair, and the work is honest. She lowered her voice. Thank you for helping me find this position. I merely made an introduction. You earned the job yourself. He hesitated, then added, I'm glad to see you looking happier today, Miss Kelly. Theresa, she corrected, feeling bold. If I'm to call you Lucian, then fair's fair. His smile reached his eyes, crinkling the corners. Theresa it is. She brought his meal, and he ate while she tended to her remaining duties. As the last customers left and she began wiping down tables, Lucian approached Mrs. Martinez at the counter, speaking too quietly for Theresa to hear. The older woman nodded several times, glancing toward Theresa with an expression that seemed both concerned and contemplative. When Theresa finished her tasks, Mrs. Martinez called her over. Child, Lucian tells me you might not feel safe returning to your boarding house alone, given yesterday's events with Blackstone. Theresa's cheeks flushed. I wouldn't want to impose nonsense, Mrs. Martinez interrupted. I have a small room upstairs I've been meaning to rent out. It's nothing fancy, but it's clean and right above the cafe. You could stay there if you'd like. and we'd adjust your wages accordingly." Surprised, Theresa looked between them. "That's very generous, but I've already paid through the week at Mrs. Finch's boarding house." "I spoke with Mrs. Finch this afternoon," Lucian said. "Explained the situation. She's agreed to refund your remaining days." "You did that for me?" Theresa asked, amazed at his thoughtfulness. He shrugged slightly. "Blackstone has friends in town. It seemed prudent to ensure you were somewhere safer." "And having you upstairs would mean you could help open in the mornings," Mrs. Martinez added practically. "What do you say?" The offer was unexpected but welcome. The boarding house was respectable enough, but the walls were thin, and she'd often lain awake listening to the comings and goings of other lodgers. The idea of a room above the cafe, with Mrs. Martinez's motherly presence nearby, was appealing. "I accept with gratitude," Theresa said. "When may I bring my things?" "Right now, if you'd like," Mrs. Martinez replied. "Lucian has offered to escort you to collect your belongings." And so, as dusk fell over Redemption Creek, Theresa found herself walking beside Lucian once more, this time toward a new beginning. "You've done so much for a stranger," she said softly as they approached the boarding house. "I don't know how to thank you properly." "Seeing you safe is thanks enough," he replied. Then, more hesitantly, "Though I admit I'm not acting entirely selflessly." She tensed slightly. "Oh?" "I find myself wanting to know you better, Theresa Kelly," he said simply. "If that's something you might be open to in time." The honesty in his voice disarmed her. "I've learned to be cautious with men's interest," she admitted. "As you should be." He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "I'm not asking for anything now, just the possibility of friendship, and perhaps, if it feels right to both of us, something more down the road." In the fading light, his face was earnest and open, without the predatory edge she'd grown accustomed to seeing in men's eyes. "I think I would like that," she said softly. "Friendship to start." His smile was gentle. "Then that's where we'll begin." At the boarding house, Mrs. Finch greeted them with knowing looks but made no comment as Theresa packed her trunk. Lucian carried it effortlessly back to the cafe, where Mrs. Martinez showed them to a small but clean room with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the main street. "It's perfect," Theresa declared, genuinely pleased with her new accommodation. "Good," Mrs. Martinez nodded. "Get some rest, child. Morning comes early in a cafe." After the older woman left them alone, Lucian set down the trunk and moved toward the door. "I should be going. My men are probably tearing up the town by now." "When do you leave?" Theresa asked, suddenly anxious about the answer. "Not for another week. We're restocking and resting the horses before heading back to Silverton Ranch." He paused at the doorway. "Perhaps I could call on you tomorrow evening. There's a social at the church. Nothing fancy, just music and conversation." The invitation warmed her. "I'd like that very much." After he left, Theresa sat on the edge of the bed, marveling at how much her circumstances had changed in just 24 hours. From being slapped and humiliated in a saloon to having employment, safer lodgings, and the prospect of friendship with a man unlike any she'd met before. She knew enough of life's cruelties to remain cautious, but for the first time since arriving in Redemption Creek, she allowed herself to feel a flicker of genuine hope. The next morning, Theresa rose before dawn, dressed quickly in the dim light, and made her way downstairs. She found Mrs. Martinez already at work, kneading dough for the day's bread. "Good morning, child," the older woman greeted her. "Sleep well?" "Better than I have in weeks," Theresa admitted, tying on her apron. "What can I do to help?" "Start the coffee and set the tables. Samuel will be in shortly to begin breakfast." Mrs. Martinez worked the dough with practiced hands. "Lucian Vance is a good man, you know." Theresa busied herself with the coffee pot. "He seems to be. Known him since he was a boy. His father worked the Silverton spread before him. Honest people." Mrs. Martinez glanced up. "Not like some in this town." "I've only just met him," Theresa said cautiously. "Of course." The older woman nodded. Take your time. Just know I wouldn't have let him bring you here if I didn't trust him completely. The morning rush kept them busy, with miners heading to work and shopkeepers stopping in for a quick meal before opening their establishments. Theresa moved among the tables with growing confidence, learning customers' names and preferences. Several men commented on seeing her sing at the saloon, but their remarks remained respectful under Mrs. Martinez's watchful eye. By afternoon, Theresa had fallen into an easy rhythm with the work. As the lunch crowd thinned, Mrs. Martinez approached her with a small bundle. "Here," she said, pressing it into Theresa's hands, "for tonight's social." Theresa unwrapped the package to find a simple but lovely shawl in deep blue. "Mrs. Martinez, I couldn't—" "Nonsense. It's been sitting in my drawer for years. My daughter left it behind when she moved to Denver." Mrs. Martinez waved away her protests. "It matches your eyes. Take a few hours to rest before the evening rush, then you can leave early to prepare for the social." Touched by the unexpected kindness, Theresa hugged the older woman impulsively. "Thank you." Mrs. Martinez patted her back awkwardly, but her eyes were warm. "Off with you now. Those tables won't clean themselves." That evening, Theresa changed into her best dress, a modest green cotton with lace trim at the collar and cuffs. She draped Mrs. P. Martinez's shawl around her shoulders and arranged her hair in a simple but elegant style. The bruise on her cheek had faded enough to be barely noticeable. When she descended to the cafe, both Mrs. Martinez and Samuel looked up from their closing duties. "Well now," Mrs. Martinez said with satisfaction, "you clean up nicely, child." Even Samuel grunted what sounded like approval. A knock at the door announced Lucian's arrival. He, too, had dressed for the occasion in a clean white shirt with a string tie, his usual worn denim replaced by dark trousers. He removed his hat when he saw her, and for a moment simply stared. "You look lovely, Theresa," he said finally. "Thank you." She fidgeted with the shawl. "Is it too much? I don't want to appear inappropriate." "Not at all," he assured her. "You look perfect." Mrs. Martinez shooed them toward the door. "Go on, you two. Enjoy yourselves. But remember, Theresa, we open early tomorrow." "Yes, madam," Theresa promised. "I won't be late." The church social was held in the small town hall, adjacent to the white-steepled building. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a warm glow over the gathered townsfolk. A small group of musicians played fiddle and guitar in one corner, while tables laden with food and punch lined the opposite wall. Theresa hesitated at the entrance, suddenly nervous. These were respectable people, shopkeepers, ranchers, and their families. Would they welcome a former saloon singer in their midst? Lucian seemed to sense her unease. "Everyone's welcome here," he said quietly. "The pastor's wife, Mrs. Wilson, organizes these gatherings specifically to help newcomers feel part of the community." As if summoned by his words, a plump, cheerful woman in her 50s approached them. "Lucian Vance, I'd heard you were back in town." She turned warm eyes to Theresa. "And who is your lovely companion?" "Mrs. Wilson, may I present Miss Theresa Kelly? She's recently taken a position at Mrs. Martinez's cafe." "Wonderful to meet you, my dear," Mrs. Wilson said, taking Theresa's hands in her own. "We're so pleased you could join us this evening. Come, let me introduce you to some of the ladies." Before Theresa could protest, she was whisked away to meet a circle of women who welcomed her with varying degrees of curiosity and warmth. She caught glimpses of Lucian throughout the evening as he conversed with men she assumed were fellow ranchers and townspeople. After the initial introductions, Mrs. Wilson led Theresa to the refreshment table. "You must try the apple cake, Mrs. Donovan's specialty." "Thank you for making me feel welcome," Theresa said, accepting a small plate. "I wasn't sure how I'd be received given my previous employment." Mrs. Wilson's expression softened. "My dear, we all have pasts. What matters is the present and the choices we make now." She lowered her voice confidentially. "Besides, Victor Blackstone's reputation is well known to the women of this town. You're not the first to suffer his temper, though few have stood up to him as you did." "Lucian stood up to him," Theresa corrected. I merely tried to get fair payment." "Which took courage." Mrs. Wilson smiled at something over Theresa's shoulder. "And speaking of Lucian, I believe he's coming to reclaim your company." Indeed, Lucian approached with 2 cups of punch. "I hope Mrs. Wilson hasn't been overwhelming you with introductions," he said, offering Theresa a drink. "Not at all," Theresa assured him. "Everyone has been very kind." Mrs. Wilson excused herself to attend to other guests, leaving them alone by the refreshment table. "Would you care to dance?" Lucian asked as the musicians began a waltz. Theresa hesitated. "It's been some time since I've danced properly." "I promise not to tread on your toes too badly," he said with a smile. She placed her hand in his and allowed him to lead her to the makeshift dance floor. His hand at her waist was respectful, keeping a proper distance between them as they moved to the music. For all his self-deprecation, Lucian proved to be a capable dancer, guiding her smoothly through the steps. "Where did a cowboy learn to waltz?" she asked, genuinely curious. "My mother insisted," he replied, "said every gentleman should know how to dance even if he spent most of his days in the saddle." "She sounds like a wise woman." She was. A shadow passed over his face. "We lost her to fever when I was 16. "I'm sorry," Theresa said softly. "My parents died of influenza 3 years ago. That's partly why I came west. There was nothing left for me in Chicago." "And is there something for you here?" he asked, his eyes searching hers. "I'm beginning to think there might be," she admitted. The music ended, and they stood for a moment, still connected by their joined hands, until applause for the musicians broke the spell. The evening continued pleasantly, with more dancing, conversation, and introductions. Theresa found herself genuinely enjoying the simple gathering, so different from the raucous atmosphere of the saloon. By the time Lucian escorted her back to the cafe, she felt lighter than she had in months. "Thank you for inviting me," she said as they reached her door. "I haven't enjoyed myself so much in a very long time." "It was my pleasure," he replied. "Perhaps we could attend church together on Sunday, if you're amenable." The invitation surprised her. She hadn't been to a church service since her parents' funeral. "I'd like that," she found herself saying. "Good night, then, Theresa." He tipped his hat and waited until she was safely inside before turning to leave. As she prepared for bed, Theresa reflected on the evening. It felt strange to be treated with such respect and consideration after months of enduring Blackstone's cruelty and the saloon patron's lewd remarks. She wasn't naive enough to believe all her troubles were behind her, but for the first time since arriving in Redemption Creek, she felt a sense of belonging. The next few days fell into a pleasant routine. Theresa worked hard at the cafe, earning Mrs. Martinez's approval and building rapport with the regular customers. Each evening, Lucian would stop by for supper, sometimes lingering to talk after the other patrons had gone. She learned that he'd been born and raised in Wyoming Territory, that his father had taught him everything he knew about cattle and horses before passing away 5 years earlier. He spoke of the Silverton Ranch with pride and affection, describing the vast stretches of grazing land, the bunkhouse where his cowboys lived, and the small but comfortable main house. "It's nothing fancy," he admitted, "but on clear evenings when you can see the sun setting behind the mountains and hear the creek running nearby, it feels like the finest place on earth." In turn, she told him about her childhood in Chicago, her father's work as a bookkeeper, and her mother's love of music. She shared stories of singing in church and at small gatherings, how she'd dreamed of performing on bigger stages but had never imagined ending up in a frontier saloon. "Life takes unexpected turns," she mused one evening as they sat at a table after closing. "Indeed it does," he agreed, "though sometimes those turns lead us exactly where we need to be." His gaze held hers for a long moment, and Theresa felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the coffee in her cup. Sunday arrived, and Theresa dressed carefully in her green dress again, pinning Mrs. Martinez's cameo brooch to the collar, another generous loan from her employer. She met Lucian outside the cafe, and they walked together to the white church at the end of the main street. The service was simple but heartfelt, the congregation small enough that Theresa's presence was noted by all. Pastor Wilson preached about compassion and second chances, words that resonated deeply with her current circumstances. When the congregation stood to sing, Theresa's clear, trained voice rose above the others naturally. She hadn't intended to draw attention, but by the final verse, several people had turned to look at her in appreciation. After the service, Pastor Wilson approached them. "Miss Kelly, what a beautiful voice you have. We're always looking for people to lead the singing. Would you consider helping us in the future?" Surprised and touched by the offer, Theresa glanced at Lucian, who nodded encouragingly. "I would be honored, Pastor Wilson." "Wonderful. My wife will be delighted. She's been trying to improve our music program for years." The pastor shook her hand warmly before moving on to greet other parishioners. "It seems you're finding your place here," Lucian observed as they walked back toward town. "Thanks to you," she said. "If you hadn't intervened that day at the saloon, you would have found another way," he assured her. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, Theresa." They had reached the cafe, but neither seemed eager to part. "Would you like to take a walk?" Lucian suggested. "It's a beautiful day and there's a nice view from the hill behind the livery." The afternoon was indeed lovely, with clear blue skies and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of pine from the distant mountains. They strolled through town and up the sloping path behind the livery stable, where a grassy knoll overlooked Redemption Creek. "It's beautiful," Theresa breathed, taking in the vista of the small town nestled in the valley, surrounded by rolling hills that gave way to more distant mountains. "This is my favorite spot in town," Lucian admitted. "Whenever I'm passing through, I try to make time to come up here and just look." They sat on the grass, a respectable distance apart, enjoying the view in comfortable silence until Lucian spoke again. "I'll be leaving at the end of the week," he said quietly. "The cattle are rested, and we need to get back to the ranch before the first snow." Though she'd known this was coming, Theresa felt a sharp pang of disappointment. "Of course, you have responsibilities." "Yes?" He plucked a blade of grass, twisting it between his fingers. "But I find myself reluctant to go." She looked at him then, studying the strong profile against the backdrop of blue sky. In such a short time, he had become important to her in ways she hadn't anticipated. "How far is Silverton Ranch from here?" she asked. "About 3 days' ride." He turned to face her. "I was wondering if you might consider corresponding while I'm away. Letters can make the distance seem less vast." "I'd like that very much," she said softly. "And perhaps when spring comes and the trails are clear, you might consider visiting." The invitation was tentative, his eyes searching hers for a reaction. The ranch is at its prettiest then, with wildflowers covering the meadows. The prospect both thrilled and frightened her. "That's a long way off, Lucian. We've known each other less than a week." "I know," he acknowledged, "and I'm not asking for promises, just possibilities." She considered his words carefully. In her experience, men's interest tended to be immediate and demanding. Lucian's patience, his willingness to allow feelings to develop naturally over time, was refreshingly different. "I think possibilities are something I can consider," she said finally. His smile was worth the admission. They sat together a while longer, talking of smaller things, books they'd read, places they'd seen, dreams they still harbored. As the sun began its descent, they made their way back to town, both aware that their time together was growing short. The remainder of the week passed too quickly. Lucian continued to visit the cafe each evening, sometimes bringing small gifts, a ribbon for her hair, a book of poetry, wildflowers gathered from the hillside. Their conversations deepened, revealing more of themselves to each other with each passing day. On Lucian's final evening in town, Mrs. Martinez shooed them out early. "Go on," she insisted. "Samuel and I can manage. You young people should enjoy these last few hours together." They walked through town, past the church, and along the creek that gave the settlement its name. The evening was mild, with stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "I've been thinking," Lucian said as they paused on a small footbridge, "about what happens next." "And what have you concluded?" Theresa asked, watching the water flow beneath them. That I want to court you properly, Theresa Kelly. He turned to face her fully. I know it's soon, and I know you have reasons to be cautious, but these past days have shown me what kind of woman you are. Strong, kind, talented, resilient. I would be honored if you would consider my suit. Theresa's heart quickened at his words. Part of her wanted to throw caution aside and embrace the feelings that had been growing since their first meeting. Another part, the part that remembered Blackstone's cruelty and the vulnerability of her position, counseled prudence. I'm very drawn to you, Lucian, she admitted, more than I thought possible in such a short time. But I'm still finding my footing here, discovering who I can be in this place. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. Then we'll take it slowly. We'll write letters, get to know each other better that way. And when I return in spring for supplies, we'll see where we stand. That sounds wise, she agreed, relieved by his patience. But there is one thing I'd like to ask now, if I may. He took a half-step closer. May I kiss you goodbye, Theresa? The simple request, asked with such respect, touched her deeply. Yes, she whispered. Lucian's lips met hers gently, a brief, tender touch that conveyed affection without demand. When he pulled back, his eyes were warm in the gathering dusk. I'll write as soon as I reach the ranch, he promised, and I'll reply, she assured him. They walked back to the cafe hand in hand, savoring these final moments together. At her door, he kissed her once more, then stepped back with obvious reluctance. Good night, Theresa. Dream well. Good night, Lucian. Safe travels. She watched him walk away until he disappeared into the shadows, then climbed the stairs to her small room above the cafe. For all the uncertainty of what lay ahead, she felt a curious peace. Whatever happened between them, Lucian Vance had already given her something precious, the belief that she deserved kindness and respect. The morning of Lucian's departure dawned clear and cool. Theresa rose early, knowing his cattle drive would leave at first light. From her window, she could see activity at the edge of town where the men and animals were gathering. Mrs. Martinez found her watching from the cafe doorway. Go, the older woman said gently. Say a proper goodbye. I'll mind things here. Grateful, Theresa hurried through the awakening town. The cattle drive was already forming, with cowboys on horseback positioning themselves around the herd. She spotted Lucian immediately, sitting tall on his bay gelding, issuing quiet orders to his men. He saw her approaching and dismounted quickly, meeting her at the edge of the gathered cattle. Theresa, I didn't expect to see you this morning. I couldn't let you leave without saying goodbye once more, she said, suddenly shy in the presence of his men, who were studiously pretending not to watch their exchange. Lucian removed his hat, holding it against his chest. I'm glad you came. I brought you something. She pressed a small parcel into his hand. Just a token for your journey. He unwrapped it to find a handkerchief she'd embroidered with his initials during the night. It was a simple gift, but his smile told her he understood its meaning. Thank you, he said, carefully tucking it into his shirt pocket. I'll keep it close. A call from one of his men indicated it was time to depart. Lucian glanced back at the waiting herd, then returned his gaze to Theresa. Until spring, then, he said softly. Until spring, she echoed. He bent to kiss her cheek, a gentle gesture that somehow felt more intimate than their kisses the previous evening. Then he mounted his horse, settled his hat firmly on his head, and rode to the front of the herd. Theresa watched until the dust from the departing cattle obscured her view, then walked slowly back to the cafe, already composing her first letter in her mind. The weeks that followed brought significant changes to Theresa's life in Redemption Creek. Her work at the cafe earned her the respect of the townspeople, while her singing at church services gave her the musical outlet she'd been missing. Mrs. Martinez became a friend as well as an employer, sharing stories of her own journey west years earlier and offering practical advice on surviving frontier life. Victor Blackstone made one attempt to intimidate her, cornering her outside the general store with threats about ruining her reputation in town. His breath reeked of whiskey, and his bloodshot eyes held the same cruelty she remembered all too well. "You think you're too good for my saloon now? Singing in church and serving coffee to respectable folks?" he sneered. "They'll tire of you eventually. They always do of your kind." Before she could respond, the general store owner, Mr. Peterson, emerged with a shotgun. "Move along, Blackstone. Miss Kelly is a valued customer here, and I don't take kindly to anyone threatening ladies on my property." Blackstone had slunk away with a final venomous glare, but the encounter left Theresa shaken. She mentioned it in her next letter to Lucian, not wanting to worry him, but unwilling to hide the truth of her situation. His reply came quickly. "My dearest Theresa, your letter troubled me deeply. The thought of Blackstone threatening you, even from a distance, fills me with both anger and concern. Please know that if you ever feel unsafe, my friend Sheriff Taylor will help you. I've written to him separately about the matter. That said, I'm proud of how you're handling yourself in Redemption Creek. Mrs. Martinez writes that you've become indispensable at the cafe. Yes, we correspond as well. She's known me since I was knee-high to a grasshopper and feels entitled to keep tabs on me. Your descriptions of singing in church make me wish I could be there to hear you. Life at the ranch continues as always, mending fences, tending cattle, preparing for winter. The first snow fell last week, blanketing everything in white. I thought of you when I saw it, how you mentioned never seeing proper snowfall in Chicago with all the chimney smoke and city grime. I find myself looking forward to your letters more than is probably sensible. Your words bring light to these short winter days. Until spring, Lucian." His letters became her treasures, read and reread by lamplight in her small room. Through his words, she came to know the rhythm of ranch life, the pre-dawn rising, the satisfaction of work well done, the camaraderie of men who depended on each other for survival. He wrote of his hopes for expanding the ranch, breeding stronger cattle, perhaps adding orchards to the property someday. In turn, she shared her growing contentment with life in Redemption Creek, her friendship with Mrs. Martinez, and her budding relationships with other townswomen through church activities. She told him of her dreams to perhaps teach music to children eventually, an idea encouraged by Pastor Wilson's wife. As winter deepened, the correspondence became more personal. Lucian wrote of his loneliness growing up as an only child, his grief when his parents died, his determination to make the ranch successful in their memory. Theresa confessed her fears of never finding a true place to belong, the shame she still carried from her time at the saloon, her worry that she'd never be fully accepted in respectable society. His response to that particular letter arrived on a bitterly cold January morning. "My dear Theresa, never apologize for your past. You did what was necessary to survive, and there is no shame in that. The people who matter, Mrs. Martinez, the Wilsons, the decent folk of Redemption Creek, see you for who you truly are, a woman of character, talent, and remarkable resilience. As for belonging, I believe we create our own places in this world. Some are fortunate enough to be born into theirs, others must forge them through determination and courage. You are doing exactly that in Redemption Creek, building a life worthy of your talents and heart. The ranch feels emptier this winter than in years past. I find myself talking to my horse more than is strictly normal, which the men find highly amusing. I believe he's tired of hearing your name, but as he can't object in any language I understand, I continue regardless. Spring seems very far away tonight, with the wind howling across the plains and snow piled against the doors. But each day brings it closer, and with it, the hope of seeing you again. Yours, Lucian." By February, Theresa had saved enough from her wages to purchase fabric for a new dress, a deep blue that Mrs. Wilson helped her fashion into a style more current than her aging wardrobe. The women of the church sewing circle taught her new stitches and techniques, treating her as one of their own despite knowing her previous occupation. "You've become quite popular," Mrs. Martinez observed one evening as they closed the cafe. Mrs. Wilson tells me young Mr. Daniels has been asking about you. Theresa looked up from wiping tables. The banker's son? I've barely spoken to him. He attends church very regularly these days, Mrs. Martinez said with a knowing smile. Always manages to sit where he can see you sing. Well, he'll be disappointed if he's developing any interest, Theresa replied firmly. My affections are already engaged elsewhere. Mrs. Martinez nodded approvingly. As they should be. Lucian is worth 10 of that pampered boy. She hesitated, then added more gently, but he's also 3 days' hard ride away, with a ranch that demands his constant attention. Have you considered what that might mean for your future? The question had indeed crossed Theresa's mind during the long winter evenings. I'm taking one day at a time, she said carefully. We're still getting to know each other. Through letters, Mrs. Martinez pointed out, which, while lovely, don't always reveal everything about a person or a life. What are you saying? The older woman sighed. Just that ranch life is hard, especially for women. Isolated, demanding, often thankless. Lucian's mother struggled with it for all that she loved her husband and son. I would hate to see you make a decision without understanding what you'd be choosing. Theresa considered this. Thank you for your concern, truly. But Lucian and I haven't made any decisions yet. When spring comes, we'll see where we stand. Of course, child. Mrs. Martinez patted her hand. I just want you to be happy, wherever that happiness leads you. As March arrived, bringing thaws and the first hints of green to the hills around Redemption Creek, Theresa found herself increasingly anticipating Lucian's return. According to his letters, he planned to bring cattle to market in early April, which would bring him through town. The prospect both excited and unnerved her. Would the connection they'd built through their winter correspondence translate to the same easy companionship they'd enjoyed during his previous stay? Had she romanticized their brief time together, building it into something larger in his absence? These doubts were still circling in her mind when the stage brought unexpected news in the form of a travel-worn woman who entered the cafe one rainy afternoon in late March. "Coffee, please," the woman requested, removing her damp bonnet to reveal graying blonde hair. "And whatever food you have ready. I've been traveling since dawn." Theresa brought the requested items, noting the woman's quality clothing and refined accent, not their usual clientele, who tended to be locals or occasional cowboys passing through. "Might I ask if you know of a Mr. Lucian Vance?" the woman inquired after taking a sip of coffee. "I'm told he sometimes frequents this establishment when in town." Surprised, Theresa set down the coffee pot she'd been holding. "Yes, I know Mr. Vance. He's expected in town in early April." "Ah, excellent," the woman smiled, though the expression didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm Eleanor Prescott, his aunt. I've come from Boston to discuss some family matters with him." "His aunt?" Theresa repeated, confused. Lucian had never mentioned family in the East in any of his letters. "On his mother's side," Mrs. Prescott clarified. "I've been trying to locate him for some months now. Family business, you understand. Quite urgent." "I see." Theresa wasn't sure she did understand, but it wasn't her place to question. "Would you like me to give him a message when he arrives?" "That won't be necessary. I plan to stay until he comes." The woman glanced around the cafe. "Is there somewhere reputable in town where I might take a room?" "Mrs. Finch's boarding house is very respectable," Theresa offered, "just down the street on the right." "Thank you, Miss Kelly, Theresa Kelly." Something flickered in Mrs. Prescott's eyes. "Ah, the young woman he's been corresponding with. He mentioned you in his letter to my husband last fall." This news surprised Theresa. Lucian had written to family he'd never mentioned to her? He did. Indeed. Said he'd met a charming singer. Mrs. Prescott's gaze was assessing. "Though he didn't mention you were working in a cafe." The slight pause before cafe carried unmistakable meaning. Somehow, this woman knew about Theresa's previous employment at the saloon. "I've only been at the cafe since October," Theresa said carefully. "Mrs. Martinez has been very kind to me." "I'm sure. Mrs. Prescott's smile remained fixed. Well, Miss Kelly, I appreciate the information. I believe I'll inquire at that boarding house you mentioned. After the woman left, Theresa found herself unsettled. There had been something calculating in Mrs. Prescott's manner, something that contradicted the warmth Lucian had described in his mother's nature. That evening, she mentioned the encounter to Mrs. Martinez. Prescott, you say? The older woman frowned. Lucian's mother was a clerk before she married. Never heard of any Prescotts. She said she was his aunt on his mother's side. Mrs. Martinez looked skeptical. Could be, I suppose. The Clarks were from back east originally, but it seems strange Lucian never mentioned her. Theresa agreed but didn't know what to make of the situation. Should she try to send word to Lucian about his supposed aunt's arrival? But if the woman was legitimate family, that might seem presumptuous on her part. Her dilemma was solved the following morning when Mrs. Prescott returned to the cafe, this time accompanied by a tall, well-dressed man she introduced as her son, Thomas Prescott. We've decided to wait for Lucian at the ranch, she announced. It seems more practical than staying in town, and Thomas is eager to see the property. The ranch? Theresa repeated, confused again. Silverton is quite remote, madam. The trail can be difficult this time of year. We've hired a guide, Thomas Prescott interjected smoothly. Handsome in a polished way, with carefully styled hair and an expensive suit, he looked entirely out of place in the rustic cafe. Mr. Reynolds assures us he knows the way perfectly well. Theresa recognized the name. Jeb Reynolds was a former Silverton ranch hand who'd been dismissed the previous year for stealing. Lucian had mentioned him in a letter as someone not to be trusted. Mr. Reynolds was asked to leave Mr. Vance's employ, she said carefully. I'm not sure he's the most reliable guide. Is that so? Thomas's smile didn't waver. Well, beggars can't be choosers in these parts, it seems. He's the only one willing to take us out there before the spring thaw is complete. Mrs. Prescott regarded Theresa with renewed interest. You seem very well informed about my nephew's affairs. Miss Kelly. Lucian and I correspond, Theresa replied simply. How charming. The older woman's tone suggested she found it anything but. Well, we must be off. The horses are waiting. After they left, Theresa immediately sought out Mrs. Martinez in the kitchen. Something isn't right, she said, explaining about Reynolds. I agree, Mrs. Martinez said, wiping her hands on her apron. Lucian would have mentioned family coming from Boston, especially if they planned to visit the ranch. What should we do? The older woman considered for a moment. Send word to Sheriff Taylor. He can't stop them from going to the ranch. It's not illegal to visit family property, but he should know our concerns. Theresa did as suggested, but Sheriff Taylor's response was frustratingly limited. I can't intervene based on suspicion alone, Miss Kelly. If they claim to be family, and they have a guide willing to take them there, it's not my place to stop them. But Reynolds was fired for stealing, Theresa protested, and served his time in jail for it, the sheriff countered. He's free to work as a guide if he chooses. I'm sorry, but my hands are tied unless they actually break the law. Theresa returned to the cafe feeling helpless. If only Lucian were due sooner, or if there were some way to send him warning. But the nearest telegraph office was in Cheyenne, a full day's ride away, and she had no way to reach him at the ranch. The day passed slowly, her worry growing with each hour. By evening, she'd made a decision. I need to borrow your horse, she told Mrs. Martinez after closing. I'm going to ride to meet Lucian on the trail from Silverton. That's madness. Child, Mrs. Martinez exclaimed, it's too dangerous for a woman alone. There are outlaws, wild animals. I know the risks, Theresa interrupted, but those people are up to no good. I'm certain of it. Lucian could be riding into a trap. Mrs. Martinez studied her face, then sighed heavily. You love him that much? The question caught Theresa off guard. Did she love Lucian? The winter of letters, the memories of their brief time together, the constant thoughts of him. Yes, she realized, she did. I do, she admitted aloud for the first time. Enough to risk this. The older woman nodded slowly. Then you won't go alone. Samuel was a scout before he was a cook. He knows these trails better than anyone. To Theresa's surprise, Samuel agreed immediately when Mrs. Martinez explained the situation. The taciturn cook merely nodded, said, "First light," and went to prepare provisions. They departed as dawn broke the next morning, Theresa riding Mrs. Martinez's gentle mare while Samuel led on his sturdy Mustang. The old cook remained mostly silent as they traveled, occasionally pointing out landmarks or warning of difficult terrain ahead. By midday, they'd reached a ridge overlooking the main trail that led from Silverton Ranch toward town. Samuel held up his hand for a halt. "Wait here," he instructed, dismounting to study the ground below. After a few minutes, he returned to where Theresa waited anxiously. "Riders came through yesterday," he reported, "heading toward the ranch, 3 horses." "The Prescotts and Reynolds," Theresa confirmed grimly. "We need to hurry." Samuel shook his head. "Need to be careful. Don't know what they're planning. But if it's no good, rushing in won't help." They continued at a steady pace, Samuel occasionally stopping to check for signs along the trail. As afternoon turned to evening, he guided them off the main path to a small clearing sheltered by trees. "Camp here tonight," he decided. "Too dangerous to travel after dark." Theresa wanted to argue, but knew he was right. The terrain was becoming more rugged as they approached the foothills where Silverton Ranch was nestled. A misstep in the dark could mean a broken leg for their horses, or worse. They made a small, nearly smokeless fire, and Samuel prepared a simple meal from their provisions. As they ate, Theresa finally asked the question that had been nagging at her. "Do you think we're overreacting? Maybe they really are Lucian's family." Samuel's weathered face remained impassive, but he shook his head slightly. "Lucian spoke of his mother's people once. Said they disowned her when she married his father, wanted nothing to do with ranching life." He paused, then added, "No family would send Reynolds as guide. Man's a snake." They were the most words Theresa had ever heard Samuel string together. The confirmation of her suspicions was both validating and alarming. "What do you think they want?" she asked quietly. Samuel shrugged. "Land, maybe. Cattle. Ranch is prosperous now." They set out at first light the next morning, pushing harder as they drew closer to Silverton Territory. By mid-afternoon, Samuel pointed to smoke rising in the distance. "Ranch house," he said simply. They approached cautiously, using the rolling terrain for cover. As they crested a small hill overlooking the main buildings, Samuel suddenly flung out an arm to stop Theresa. "Something's wrong," he muttered. Even from this distance, Theresa could see unusual activity in the ranch yard. Several men were standing around what appeared to be a makeshift pen, while others moved between the barn and the main house. There was no sign of the normal ranch operations, no cattle being moved, no work being done on the outbuildings. "Where are Lucian's men?" she wondered aloud. Samuel pointed to a small building at the edge of the complex. "Bunkhouse. See the guard?" Indeed, a man with a rifle was stationed outside the structure, pacing back and forth. "They're being held prisoner," Theresa realized with horror. "But where's Lucian?" They observed for another hour, trying to make sense of the situation. Samuel eventually identified Reynolds among the men in the yard, confirming their suspicions about the Prescotts' intentions. Of Thomas and Eleanor Prescott, however, there was no sign. "Need to get closer," Samuel decided as dusk approached. "Stay here." "I'm coming with you," Theresa insisted. The old cook fixed her with a stern look. "Too dangerous. Need someone to go for help if things go wrong." She wanted to argue, but knew he was right. "Be careful," she urged. Samuel slipped away through the gathering shadows, moving with a stealth that belied his age. Theresa watched anxiously until she could no longer make out his form in the darkening landscape. The wait seemed interminable. Night fell completely, with only a quarter moon providing limited illumination of the ranch below. Theresa strained her eyes, trying to detect any sign of Samuel's return, or any change in the situation at the ranch house. After what felt like hours, a soft rustling behind her made her whirl around in fear. "Just me," came Samuel's whispered voice. Relief washed over her. What did you find out? In the dim moonlight, she could see his grim expression. Prescott's arrived yesterday, claimed to be family from back east, said they had papers showing they owned part of the ranch through Lucian's mother. That can't be true, Theresa protested. Isn't, Samuel confirmed, but they brought 6 hired guns with Reynolds, locked up the ranch hands. Lucian's in the house with the Prescotts. Heard one of the guards say they're forcing him to sign over the ranch. We have to help him, Theresa said immediately. Samuel nodded. Managed to talk to one of the hands. Smart boy slipped out through the bunkhouse window while the guard wasn't looking. He's riding for the marshal in Cheyenne now. But that's a full day's ride, Theresa calculated anxiously, and another day back with help. Anything could happen by then. Got another plan, Samuel said. Ranch hands outnumber the guards, just need to get them out of the bunkhouse. How do we do that? The old cook's eyes gleamed in the darkness. Distraction. As Samuel outlined his plan, Theresa's heart raced with a mixture of fear and determination. It was dangerous, certainly, but she couldn't bear the thought of Lucian facing the Prescott's treachery alone. I'll do it, she said when he finished explaining. But we have to move quickly. An hour later, Theresa approached the ranch house from the east where the shadows were deepest. She'd left her proper clothes behind, dressed now in a pair of Samuel's trousers and a dark shirt, her hair tucked up under a hat. In the darkness, she hoped she could pass for a young man at a distance. Samuel had circled around to the west side of the property, where he would create the distraction they needed. The plan was simple, but risky. When Samuel set fire to the far corral fence, the guards would hopefully rush to deal with it, giving Theresa a chance to reach the bunkhouse and free the ranch hands. Her heart pounded as she crept closer to the main buildings. 2 guards patrolled the yard, rifles slung over their shoulders. The house itself showed light in several windows, including what Samuel had identified as the study where Lucian was likely being held. A sudden shout from the western edge of the property signaled that Samuel had started his distraction. Flames leapt up from the empty corral, bright against the night sky. "Fire!" one of the guards yelled. "The corral's burning!" As hoped, both men ran toward the blaze, calling for others to help. Theresa seized her opportunity, darting across the open ground toward the bunkhouse. She reached the door without being spotted and found it secured with a heavy wooden bar. "Hello?" she whispered through a crack in the planks. "I'm here to help. I'm a friend of Lucian's." A face appeared at the small window. "Who are you?" "Theresa Kelly. Samuel sent me. He's created a distraction with the fire, but we don't have much time." "Stand back from the door," the man instructed. She moved aside, and a moment later, the door shuddered as something heavy struck it from inside. On the third impact, the bar securing it cracked and fell away. The door swung open to reveal 6 cowboys, dirty and bruised, but very much alive and angry. Their leader, a weathered man with a gray-streaked beard, assessed her quickly. "Samuel with you?" "Creating the distraction," she confirmed. "The Prescotts have Lucian in the house, forcing him to sign over the ranch." "Not for long they don't," the man growled. He turned to his companions. "Will, Jake, secure those guards by the fire. Try not to shoot unless you have to gunfire. We'll alert the others. Marcus, check the barn for weapons. The rest of you with me. We're getting the boss." With startling efficiency, the men dispersed to their assigned tasks. The leader turned back to Theresa. "I'm Hank, trail boss when Lucian's not around. You'd best stay here where it's safe." "I'm coming with you," Theresa insisted. "I didn't ride all this way to hide in the bunkhouse." Hank looked like he might argue, but another cowboy called urgently from outside. "They've spotted the missing guard. They know something's wrong." "Stay behind us then," Hank ordered Theresa, drawing a knife from his boot. Evidently the Prescott's men hadn't searched them thoroughly. "And if I tell you to run, you run. Understood?" She nodded, and they moved quickly toward the main house. The distraction at the corral was working better than expected. Nearly all the guards had responded to the fire, which was now spreading along the fence line. They reached the back door of the house without incident. Marcus rejoined them, distributing weapons he'd found hidden in the barn, 2 revolvers and a shotgun. "Lucian will be in the study," Hank whispered. "Front of the house, left side. Prescott woman and her son are likely with him, maybe one guard. How do we get in without alerting them? Theresa asked. Kitchen entrance, Hank replied, pointing to a door at the back of the house. Leads through to the main hall, studies off that hall. They slipped inside, moving as quietly as possible through the darkened kitchen. As they neared the hallway, voices became audible from the front of the house, a woman's cultured tones, a man's impatient replies, and then, making Theresa's heart leap, Lucian's familiar voice. I don't care what papers you forged, he was saying, his tone hard with anger. This ranch belonged to my father and his father before him. No Clark family trust ever existed. The documents say otherwise, came Thomas Prescott's smooth reply. And with your signature willing or not, the transfer will be complete. Mother and I have no interest in ranching, of course. We'll sell to the mining company that's been so eager to acquire this land. You'll never get away with this, Lucian growled. My men are securely locked up, Eleanor Prescott interrupted, and will remain so until we're safely away. Now sign the papers, Mr. Vance, or Reynolds will start shooting your precious cowboys one by one. Hank signaled to his men to hold position, then peered carefully around the corner into the hallway. He pulled back and whispered, one guard outside the study door, armed. Before anyone could formulate a plan, a commotion erupted outside, shouts and the sound of running feet. The guard in the hallway turned toward the front door, momentarily distracted. Hank seized the opportunity, rushing forward with surprising speed for his size. He tackled the guard before the man could raise his weapon, and the two crashed to the floor in a tangle of limbs. The study door flew open, revealing Thomas Prescott holding a small Derringer pistol to Lucian's head. Eleanor stood behind them, her face contorted with fury. What's happening? She demanded, then saw the cowboys in the hallway. How did they? Theresa stepped forward, removing her hat to let her auburn hair fall free. It's over, Mrs. Prescott. The ranch hands are free, your hired guns are being rounded up, and the real authorities have been sent for. Recognition flashed in the woman's eyes. The waitress from the cafe. I should have known. Lucian's expression shifted from grim determination to astonishment as he registered Theresa's presence. Theresa! How? Don't move, Thomas warned, pressing the Derringer more firmly against Lucian's temple. Everyone stay back or I'll kill him where he stands. No, you won't, came Samuel's quiet voice from behind them. The old cook stood in the doorway to an adjoining room, shotgun aimed steadily at Thomas Prescott. Drop it, city boy. Thomas hesitated, his eyes darting between the armed cowboys and his mother's increasingly panicked face. Mother, what should I? The moment of indecision was all Lucian needed. He drove his elbow sharply backward into Thomas's ribs, then twisted to knock the Derringer from his hand. The small gun clattered to the floor as Thomas doubled over, gasping for breath. Eleanor lunged for the weapon, but Theresa was quicker. She kicked it aside, sending it sliding under a heavy cabinet beyond reach. I told you this plan was too risky, Eleanor hissed at her son as Hank and another cowboy secured them both. Seems like the risk didn't pay off, Lucian said coldly. He turned to Hank. The others? All accounted for, boss. We've got Reynolds and his hired guns rounded up outside. Lucian nodded, then finally allowed his gaze to settle fully on Theresa. You came all this way, he began, disbelief still evident in his voice. We were worried, she said simply. Mrs. Prescott and her son visited the cafe, claiming to be your family, but something didn't feel right. The Prescotts are no relation to me, Lucian confirmed grimly. They approached me in Cheyenne after I sold the cattle, spinning a tale about being distant cousins. I was suspicious but agreed to hear them out. When we reached the ranch, they showed their true colors and their hired guns. They wanted the ranch for a mining company? Theresa asked, recalling what she'd overheard. Lucian nodded. There's silver in the North Ridge. Not enough to be worth destroying good grazing land, in my opinion, but they thought otherwise. He stepped closer to Theresa, his eyes never leaving hers. You rode all this way, into danger, because you were worried about me. Samuel came too, she pointed out, suddenly shy under his intense gaze. My eternal gratitude to Samuel. Lucian said, a smile finally breaking through his serious expression. But I'm asking about you, Theresa Kelly. What made you take such a risk? The answer was simple, now that she faced him again. The same thing that made you step into that saloon months ago to protect a woman you didn't know. Some things are worth the risk. Understanding dawned in his eyes. He reached for her hands, holding them gently in his own. When I saw you standing there, in the middle of all this chaos, I knew with absolute certainty what I've suspected all winter. His voice softened. I love you, Theresa. Letters weren't enough. I was planning to ride into town tomorrow to see you, to ask. A discreet cough from Hank interrupted the moment. Sorry, boss, but what should we do with these two until the marshal arrives? Lucian reluctantly turned his attention back to the Prescotts. Lock them in the root cellar for now. Post guards. The marshal should be here by tomorrow afternoon if your man rode straight through to Cheyenne. As Hank and the others led the prisoners away, Samuel quietly followed, leaving Lucian and Theresa alone in the study. You were saying? Theresa prompted softly when the door closed behind them. Lucian smiled, drawing her closer. I was saying that I love you, that letters weren't enough anymore, that I was coming to town tomorrow to ask if you might consider a life here, with me. It's not an easy life, as you've just seen. It can be dangerous, isolated, full of adventure, she countered, surrounded by loyal friends, blessed with open skies and a good man's love. Is that a yes? He asked, hope brightening his eyes. I haven't heard a proper question yet, she teased gently. Lucian laughed, then sobered, taking her hands in his once more. Theresa Kelly, would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife, of making this ranch a home with me, of filling it with music and warmth and perhaps someday children's laughter? Tears of joy welled in Theresa's eyes. Yes, Lucian Vance, with all my heart, yes. He drew her into his arms then, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. When they finally parted, he rested his forehead against hers. I want you to be sure, he said earnestly. After what you've just witnessed, I wouldn't blame you for having second thoughts. Ranch life isn't always this dramatic, but it's never easy. I'm sure, she replied with conviction. I've never felt as safe or as valued as I do with you. Since that first day, when you stood up for me in the saloon, you've shown me what it means to be truly respected. She touched his cheek gently. You promised I would never be hurt again. I believe you, and I want to build a life where we protect each other, always. His arms tightened around her. That's a promise I intend to keep, for all our days together. The marshal from Cheyenne arrived the following afternoon with a small posse, taking custody of the Prescotts and their hired men. The evidence of fraud was overwhelming, with forged documents found among Eleanor Prescott's possessions detailing their scheme to seize the ranch. They'll face charges of attempted fraud, kidnapping, and assault, the marshal informed Lucian. I wouldn't expect to see them outside a prison cell for many years. With the danger past, life at Silverton Ranch began to return to normal. Theresa sent word to Mrs. Martinez about their engagement and their safe resolution of the Prescott situation. The reply came back with Samuel, who had ridden to town to collect Theresa's belongings. My dearest Theresa, words cannot express my relief at your safety and joy at your engagement. Samuel has told me the whole thrilling tale, and I find myself alternately horrified at the danger you faced and bursting with pride at your courage. Your room will remain ready should you ever need it, but I suspect your future lies at Silverton Ranch with a good man who loves you as you deserve. The cafe will miss your smile and song, but I could not be happier for you both. I have taken the liberty of speaking with Pastor Wilson, who suggests a June wedding might be lovely. The church ladies are already planning a quilt for your new home together. You need not use it, of course, but it's best to accept such gifts with grace. Visit when you can. Until then, embrace your happiness with both hands, dear girl. You've earned it. With affection, Elena Martinez. P.S. Samuel has requested a permanent position at the ranch. Says the bunkhouse food is an insult to digestive systems everywhere. I believe this is his way of wanting to remain near you both." The letter brought tears to Theresa's eyes. Mrs. Martinez had become like family to her during her months in Redemption Creek. She would miss the older woman's wisdom and warmth. "We'll visit often," Lucian promised when she shared these thoughts, "and she'll always be welcome here." Spring bloomed across the ranch, transforming the landscape just as Lucian had described in his winter letters. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows, and new calves wobbled alongside their mothers in the lower pastures. Theresa found herself falling in love with the rhythms of ranch life, the pre-dawn quiet, the satisfaction of work completed by sunset, the breathtaking beauty of starlit nights. Samuel took over the ranch kitchen, much to the delight of the cowboys. Theresa helped where she could, learning the practical skills of managing a ranch household from the older cook and from books Lucian's mother had left behind. In the evenings, she would often sing while Lucian played the battered piano in the main room, a talent he'd modestly omitted from his letters. These simple moments, filled with music and companionship, became the foundation of their life together. They were married on the first Saturday in June in the white church in Redemption Creek. Mrs. Martinez bustled about like a mother of the bride, while Samuel, to everyone's shock, donned a proper suit and spoke a full paragraph when asked to give a toast at the small reception. "Never seen two people more meant for each other," the old cook declared, raising his glass. "From the moment Miss Theresa walked into that cafe, knew she was special. Brave enough to stand up to Blackstone, smart enough to see through the Prescotts, and kind enough to bring music back to a silent house. To the bride and groom, long life and happiness." As Lucian and Theresa began their married life at Silverton Ranch, the events that had brought them together, Blackstone's cruelty, the Prescotts' deception, faded into memory, overshadowed by the joy they found in building a future together. Theresa started a small school for the children of the ranch hands and nearby homesteaders, teaching reading and music 3 days a week. Lucian expanded the orchards his mother had once dreamed of planting, adding apple and cherry trees that would bear fruit in years to come. When their first child, a daughter, was born the following spring, they named her Elena, after the woman who had given Theresa shelter when she needed it most. 2 years later, a son joined the family, bringing new laughter to the ranch house that had once seemed so empty to Lucian during those long winter months. On their 5th wedding anniversary, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in gold and crimson, Lucian took Theresa's hand in his. "Happy?" he asked, a question he still posed occasionally, as if to reassure himself that she had no regrets about choosing this life. "Completely," she answered truthfully, leaning her head against his shoulder. Their children played nearby, Elena teaching her younger brother a simple song Theresa had composed. "Do you ever miss your singing career?" Lucian wondered. "The applause, the audiences?" Theresa smiled, thinking of the life she had once imagined for herself and the reality she had found instead. "I still sing every day," she reminded him, "and I have the most appreciative audience I could ask for." She gestured toward their children, then squeezed his hand. "Besides, the most important song I ever sang was the one that brought you into that saloon on a particular October afternoon." "I'm grateful for that song every day," Lucian murmured, drawing her closer, "and for the brave woman who sang it, even with a bruised cheek and wounded pride." As the sun slipped below the horizon, Theresa reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment, from a frightened, lonely young woman enduring humiliation in a frontier saloon to the confident wife, mother, and teacher she had become. The path had not been straight or easy, but each step, even the painful ones, had led her home. "I made you a promise that day," Lucian said softly, as if reading her thoughts, "that you would never be hurt again. And you've kept it," she whispered, "not by shielding me from all of life's hardships, but by standing beside me through them, by believing in my strength even when I doubted it myself." Their life together would continue to face challenges, harsh winters, dry summers, the inevitable sorrows and joys that attend any full life. But as they sat together in the gathering dusk, surrounded by the family they had created and the land they both loved, Theresa knew with absolute certainty that she had found her place in the world not on a grand stage before anonymous admirers, but here, in the arms of a man who had seen her worth from the very beginning and had never wavered in his devotion. The woman who had once been beaten and humiliated had found not just protection, but partnership, not just safety, but strength, not just a promise kept, but a future filled with love beyond anything she could have imagined that fateful day in Redemption Creek.